So contracts initiative next steps, overview of 2019 contracts, policies, processes, and roles. As mentioned, some of you may be familiar with the contracts overview that has been introduced from December forward. Today we're going to take a little bit deeper dive and outline some of the processes and roles in addition to taking a quick recap into what those contracts policies mean to you all. So our objective today is to reintroduce the two new policies at Pacific, contracts policy, contract signature authority policy. I don't do well with mics. We're going to explore contracts processes and roles. What that means is how are we going to support you with these policies? How do you determine your role with contracts if you're not clear already as we enter into some shifts and changes that are effective 2/1. Then we're going to highlight some resources, some support and training that are going to be available as these policies go live. And then next steps, where do we go from here? So contracts policy overview. Just in consideration for those that might be new to this presentation, we wanted to just recap some of the highlights of these new policies and why these new contracts policies are important. So we're moving forward with these policies to ensure that we're establishing protocols before entering into contractual agreements through an institutional contracts management process. So really what that means in short English is that we want to standardize some of the review process. That is not to say that what's happening at the university is not being done well. What we want to do is complement what you all are doing in your units and standardize what core and supplemental review needs to happen from a higher level. Another really important area why contract policies are important is because we need to mitigate risks, both from a monetary and non-monetary perspective. For the best interest of Pacific, regulations, rules, policies, it's a complex topic. There's guidelines, there's standards, there's compliance, there's constraints, consideration, laws, conduct, procedures, rules, you name it. There's a lot that goes into why contracts is important. And while some of you might be vying to join Margaret as a lawyer, others just need to have a baseline level of understanding of contracts as you support it at Pacific. And so that's what this program is tailored to do, to help you navigate contracts at Pacific without joining Margaret in the General Counsel office. The third and other area which is important is to ensure proper signature authority of those issuing contracts on behalf of Pacific while creating a repository. This is an important area. So some of you remember a few years ago when our network went down, right? What would we have done if we couldn't find the original contract for that respective relationship with that vendor? That would have been a huge step backwards, and all of the liability and risk potentially could have been on Pacific, just as a side example. But it's not until those things happen that we start to think about why this is important as a whole. The other piece is the digital age. We don't have electronic signatures yet institutionalized. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish as a third and last step of what we're trying to accomplish with this program. So some of the highlights of the specifics of the policies are contracts policy itself, university-wide. It applies to everybody. Monetary and non-monetary. Again, a lot of what we hear is, but my contract has no dollar value. Well, risks sometimes equate to a dollar value or the liability we have as it relates to any obligation that we impart on behalf of Pacific. So with this, we want to establish a framework for contract review and approval. We want to ensure non-template university contracts are reviewed by appropriate offices based on risks and established contract type. And then we want to standardize contract retention. Again, that example of who has the contract. Right now we have contracts that are in people's drawers. They might be in a PDF. We might have a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. So again, this is a really important piece that we need to standardize. The second policy that's going into place is to extend beyond what a lot of us are familiar with in terms of a signature authority policy. So the contract signature authority policy is not to replace the existing signature authority that is in place at the institution. This is going to provide a guideline for appropriate delegation of signature and responsibilities for the university to contract accordingly. So the difference is budget authority versus contract authority. So you might have authority to release a certain amount on a check request or a payment, but there's a difference between releasing a payment against a contract that might have a far greater or even of an equal value in terms of that contract value. Because again, we want to think of it as type. So if we're going into a technology contract, Matt, for example, might have the authority to spend a certain amount in accord with his budget, but should he have the authority to release a contract that might affect the network or the university as a whole. So you can kind of see where the two differences are. Only individuals granted signature authority in accordance with university bylaws. So right now, what was explored through this process is that we have current bylaws that state that only the president should be signing on behalf of the board. In reality, that's not what's happening because we've had an informal delegated signature process in accord with our signature authority, which as we've identified is not the same as contract value authority. So what we want to do is put in place standards for who should be signing, and in addition to that, making sure that those signers are appropriate for what the type of contracts that are being signed. And then the last piece is the delegation of signature authority will be formal. So again, we're formalizing what's happening and improving maybe in some areas where people are signing and maybe they shouldn't. So again, this is just going to be a good process for us to standardize and formalize what may or may not be happening already. So we started to talk about what's the difference between contract versus budget authority. Existing signature authority policy is for budget. Authorized persons who can release payment against a contract. Payment may be of a lesser or equal amount to that contract value. These two are no longer one and the same. So this is going to be the biggest shift, I think, for people to kind of transition effective 2/1, is just to start to think a little differently in terms of that authority. And the second piece is the contract signature authority policy, which is who should execute, or think of it as who should sign and take responsibility on behalf of Pacific. So regardless if a contract is of monetary or non-monetary value, contract signers are standardized based upon bylaws, risks, and contract type considerations. Now this one's a loaded one. There's a lot that goes into determining who should sign, who should review it, etc. We're going to do all that heavy lifting for you, which is why we want to standardize that, so that each of you individually don't have to try to figure out where this contract should be routed. It's going to be standardized in workflows electronically so that the guesswork is taken off of you and it's institutionalized based on preset contract types. The other piece is to emphasize that it doesn't matter if a contract is of value or of non-value. It all is stemming from the same intent, which is to support regulatory and compliance. So the importance of contracts management. This slide just kind of gives you an example of some of the things that we hear most often. My contract is low dollar, do I really need it reviewed? I already signed it, does it need to be reviewed still? Right? These are things that we hear currently. This is current state. There's conflicting terms. General counsel might get a contract that we have a duplicate contract from someone else. So we have conflicting commitments. We might get penalties. There might be lawsuits or legal fees. And then how about we talk about auto renewals in a time when we're thinking about budgets, right? How many people have had a contract that have just kicked into an auto renewal and then you're stuck for another year paying, for example, another $10,000 because you didn't see the fine print that said 90 days you had to send a letter of termination or extension, right? So there's a lot that goes into managing a contract beyond just signing it and paying the bill. And that's what we're going to do to help you, is we're going to be able to manage that 90-day term and say, well, you have this contract coming up for renewal. Do you want to extend it or do you want to terminate it? And we're going to help you to manage that life cycle. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to help you to manage contracts differently, more effectively at the institution? So this is our roadmap to guide you through processes, roles, and resources. So what we're looking to accomplish is a user experience that's a 3-stage process. Simply, it's initiating a request through a central point of entry. At inception of the policies going live, you have 2 options: an email, contracts@list.pacific.edu, and or a central website that will be live 2/1. Excuse me. From central point of entry, we're asking, we will establish the review process. So the appropriate core and supplemental reviewers are automatically routed based on that contract type. And then the third and final step is the approval process. So we're going to make sure that the authorized approvers sign it and that you receive notification that it's okay for you to proceed and continue with your agreement. So what are the benefits to this review and approval process? We've talked about some of the risks and implied benefits if things go wrong, but some of the longer term benefits, excuse me, Some of the longer term benefits to standardizing the review and approval process is that this new contracts policy will allow Pacific to transition contracts management into an automated system in the very near future. So this will ensure visibility, give us data analytics, and it'll manage contracts electronically. Thank you. So electronic signatures are one of the first and foremost areas that we've heard over the years is a wish list item for folks to be able to sign electronic signatures. For people who work with a lot of outside agencies or third-party entities outside of Pacific, again, this is going to streamline the process even beyond internal signature approvals. So it will extend to our third-party engagements with outside vendors and entities as well. We're going to take that guesswork out of renewals. You're going to get automatic notifications and alerts with the new program. And then you're going to have data analytics, as mentioned, through dashboards and automated reports. So what are some of the processes that we want to introduce today to support contracts policies? One thing that we want to make sure we cover is what is the review submission process? What is the approval process? And what is the delegated signature process? I know that current state is that Matt might be signing his own contracts, but in the new policy, will he be able to continue that? So we're going to touch upon what is the process for making that determination. And then the last and fourth deliverable we want to cover in terms of processes is what will ensue with regard to the contracts consultation with our contracts management team. So the review submission process is simply establishing what your contract need is. What's required for submission? There's going to be a contracts record cover sheet, contract documentation, and then what we're asking is that you review some prerequisites which we're going to outline. So think of it as a checklist, if you will. And some who might be already really familiar with contracts and more expert in terms of their knowledge of contracts management, this prerequisites list might be second nature to you already. For others across the spectrum, they might be new to contracts, so this is going to serve as a guide for them. So again, it's a suggested requirement, but we're asking that you review them. If you're familiar with it, then you just bypass it and you continue on your way. So some of the prerequisites are review your contracts policy because it's new. Prerequisite questionnaire, which speaks to those prerequisites. For example, does your agreement entail personal information? Does it entail software? Does it have a payment mechanism? So questions like that are going to be automated to where you can go through a questionnaire that's just yes, no. But it is a checklist, if you will, to go through to determine the appropriate contract type and who should review it in our workflows. So whether we're in this inception interim process or longer term benefit of being in a standardized software system, the environment is going to be very familiar to you in either state. Existing department level review. This is a big one. We don't want to replace what's currently happening out the gate. We don't want to go 2-1 and say, okay, everything's going to change tomorrow. We want to be mindful of what's being done well and effectively, and we want to complement that and create a central entry point from 2-1 live. So what that means is, for example, in pharmacy, if there is a really well done review at a department level, we don't want to take that away. We just want to work with you, and we'll speak to what that consultation will look like later to make sure we establish with you what's the appropriate central point of entry. And that goes for every department or unit. Our commitment is to consult with you to determine what is the appropriate point to enter into the system. And then the last prerequisite we encourage is to make sure you're consulting with your business office to ensure your department head and budget approval is, if applicable, sought prior to submission. So again, this is something some folks do really well. For others, this isn't second nature. So again, we're just trying to impart best practice and what is industry standard for a optimized contracts management program. So the second piece of this is, as you'll notice, is you're just preparing. A lot of this is what you do before it even comes to us. And if you do all your prerequisites and you have the required documentation for submission, that's going to streamline the second piece, which is the most important, which is review and approval, right? All you have to do is submit, and then we're going to do the heavy lifting to route within appropriate workflows and for the appropriate approver. So your option to submit is by website or email. There's an online form in which you can attach, provide the same information that would be on a cover sheet in an email. So based on your style or preference out the gate, you're going to have two options. One, if it's more familiar to you to use a PDF cover page, you can attach it by email. Or if you like that quick, I just want to fill out a quick form, attach, and be on my way, both are going to come to us in a consistent manner with the same information that's required in order for us to route it appropriately and to the appropriate approver. So from there, we move into the approval process. What's entailed there? The review has been initiated. It goes into a predetermined workflow. That includes core and university review. So core and university review would be comprised of enterprise risk management, procurement services, general counsel, and Pacific Technology. Those four are core because those are the most associated risks or types of contracts that come through the university. In addition to that, there's supplemental review, and that's based on contract type. We used an example earlier that said maybe it has a payment mechanism. If that's the case, it goes through Pacific OneCard office to make sure that the appropriate terms are aligned with our support for payment mechanisms. And so Matt, who's in our audience, would be pulled into that workflow automatically. And he'd get an alert and he'd say, oh, I have a contract to review. So again, it's going to take the guesswork off of you to make sure that we're streamlining it to the appropriate folks for the best interest of Pacific. And then part of the review initiated is going to route contract for signature approval and retention. Again, not replacing department level review. The second piece is the signature approval. So your contract approval will entail only contracts management office routing for final signature approval. This is a slight shift from what we're currently accustomed. So right now, some have the ability to route their contract directly to the president's office or directly to the provost or to the VP of finance. But what we're trying to establish is some accountability and trust by way of standardizing some of the contract and approvers review so that when they get that contract for signature and they get that alert in their inbox, they're going to trust, as long as it comes from the contracts management office, it's gone through the appropriate workflow. So that if they're getting it from us, we're testifying to say, Matt looked at it, enterprise risk looked at it, all those core and supplemental appropriate to that contract type. Now we're going to build our workflows and we're going to work with you individually to make sure that those workflows are all aligned with what's current state, what's happening now. So it's going to take some time to build all of those, and we're going to rely on you to help. But at inception, this is how we have to take the steps to get there. And part of that is standardizing where those come from. So the approval will align with the new policy requirements, which includes the delegation where applicable. Requesters will be notified to proceed once we get that signature. And retention often is thought of as, oh, but I have my signed contract. It also includes those alerts, those reminders, or those reports that say, Matt, you have 10 contracts on record. 5 of those are coming up for renewal, right? Because we're all doing a lot. And so what this is going to do is to help to create a transparency of what you have in terms of obligations for on behalf of Pacific. The delegated contract signature process, this is going to be an area that's a slight shift. Again, as you recall, I mentioned, we're trying to standardize who should and shouldn't be signing contracts. So the first step to determine and officially put on record who is a delegated signer at the university is to complete a form. So first step. Part of that prerequisite is to make sure you've reviewed the delegated policy. Are you familiar with who should be signing? Because you might make the determination that this new policy says that you can, and you just have to make it official. In other cases, it might mean you need to consult with your VP or provost for appropriateness. And if that's the case, we want to make sure that you're having a conversation with the appropriate persons prior to it getting to our office. Because as much as I'd like to say, Matt, you do a fabulous job, I think you should be a signer, really that's a decision at a VP or higher level. And if you recall, our bylaws state that currently it's just the president, right? So what we're doing is standardizing who should be signing, who is signing, and where appropriate, where is it delegated to others with guidelines. So for that reason, when you complete your form, it has to be signed by the VP or the provost prior to submitting it to our office. Once you submit your request, what does that mean? What happens? So once you submit to the VP or provost and it's approved, it comes to our office, contracts management, and then our office will verify completeness and appropriateness in accord with the new delegation policy. We'll then route to the president for final approval, and the president has to make the final determination whether or not that request is approved or rejected. again, leaning on the bylaws, we need to standardize, and this is a step to start that process. So the delegation will be approved. Contracts Management Office will then retain the forms, and then we will requesting department will be notified of approval. So again, there's going to be some signature renewals every so often. We're still establishing what all the parameters are, but this is a general guideline effective 2/1 where you want to start, right? We're not chasing perfection. We know that this is going to take time to evolve and to mature, but out the gate, we just want you to start having those discussions with the appropriate persons. Because again, as mentioned, we're here to support you through this transition, but we're really not a deciding body. We're the support to make sure that it is streamlined and that we're making this a user-friendly experience for you as you transition through change. So the last process that we talked about was contracts consultation. We've established a contracts management team, for lack of a better word, and you have a department level support system that currently still entails. So what we want to do is take a very deliberate approach to learning what you all are doing in your departments. So if you'll notice by the left hand of my screen, we're in an open forum right now. Next steps commencing in February we'll be sending out an assessment form, and that assessment form will give us an idea of what types of contracts you're doing, what type of volume you have. It's a baseline to start the conversation. So it's going to inform us, and then what we're going to do, we're going to say, do you use templates right now? You might have templates in place that the university isn't aware of, that general counsel might not have signed off on yet. So it's not to say that those might not be some really well crafted templates, but what we want to do is standardize them, because maybe another unit could be utilizing those to the best interest of Pacific, right? So what we want to do is standardize, go through a very deliberate information gathering process where it might entail us coming out and talking with you and just listening. You know, what do you do in pharmacy? Who touches your contracts? Where do they get routed? What types of contracts, right? So what we want to do is be informed to create a workflow that supports you. And then ultimately, as we transition, we're going to give very specific training based on your role. So you might be someone that creates contracts, you might be someone that just routes them. So that training might be slightly different. You might be someone that's a signer, approver. That's going to be slightly different. So what we're going to do is take steps to do this in a very deliberate approach to making sure that we're listening, we're learning, and then we're also training you on what the best practice is going forward institutionally across all 3 campuses. What are the outcomes we expect from these consultations, as we're calling them? Is we're looking to create some standard review times and commitments to you so that in the future you can have a better understanding of how long it should take to review a technology contract or an outside third-party agreement or maybe a clerkship contract or something to that nature, right? Whatever it is. So our outcomes are to inform us. Again, we're going to listen. We want to determine what are appropriate workflows, what types of templates does the university need, or to institutionalize ones that you might be using. This is going to guide our timelines to be established for contract review. And then we're also going to provide a platform for individuals to transition by giving you planning and support. So that's going to be a bidirectional consultation, right? We're not there to just tell you how to do things. We want to learn from you also so that we can impart what's best practices with the least amount of disruption to your units. So what type of resources outside of our team are going to be available? What's going to guide you through this change? So minimizing impacts and disruption to your units at the onset of these policies going live, we're going to have our team available to you to assist you every step of the way. That's comprised of core and supplemental reviewers that are predetermined at the university, subject to grow and change and evolve as the program matures. We're going to have training resources available. So not only are we going to have a series of in-person training sessions, we're going to have video recordings, this one excluded. And then we're also going to have, as we transition to the software system, which we haven't talked much about, you're going to have user training for a system as well if you are identified in the future as a super user. And then currently we have templates that are utilized at the university and clauses that are associated. Right now we work in a very word-driven document environment. So right now some of you might use standard services agreements. Those are the most familiar. We also have an instruction sheet that says if then copy and paste this into the document, right? So those are in place now, those are available, those are in force. But what we're going to do is we're going to take it to the next level and we're going to put in place a system that's going to give you an automated experience so that when you go to create a contract, you're going to say I want a standard services agreement and it's going to say okay, choose this clause or this clause. click, insert, move on. So we're gonna make it very streamlined, user-friendly, but the experience is gonna be very similar whether we're in this interim as we go live or whether as we transition to the software system. Your user experience is gonna be very similar in parallel. So what are some of the roles? We've talked about your department role, we've talked about contracts management team. Who is comprised of these actual groups that we talk about? So for your reference, core reviewers, as mentioned, are Enterprise Risk, General Counsel, Pacific Technology, and Procurement Services. Understanding that some contracts extend beyond where the oversight of these offices might extend, supplemental reviewers have been established. So you have facilities and capital planning. You have finance, treasury, and fiscal services. So if you're entering into a lease agreement and it comes through our office or bypasses our office, that should be routed through treasury. So again, there's little things that right now we're enforcing and supporting in a manual effort. What we want to do is standardize and streamline these in automated workflows so that the guesswork is taken away. Same for development. If there's a donor agreement, that should be routed accordingly. Human resources for employment type agreements. One card office, as we've mentioned. Provost office for any type of academic agreement. Research and sponsored programs. And then there'll be others, assumedly as identified by core reviewers as we go through the process. And then third is your department. You have your requesters and you have a department level review, which might extend cross units. But what we don't want it to do is extend into supplemental or core review. So that admittedly will probably be the biggest shift, is working with you to figure out where the new transition is from what you might have as an existing department level review. So for example, pharmacy, you might route to the provost office currently. What we're gonna do is work with you to figure out at what point does it stop and become a break in department level review and then enter into official review so that the approval is sought through this process. So what we don't wanna do is create redundant review. And admittedly, there probably might be some at the inception of us going live, but once we get to a more optimal state, what it's gonna do is it's gonna have a clear break in terms of what is truly a department review versus when does it enter the system. So I work with Matt, even though he's at one card office, so sometimes he might be familiar with the contract that we're working on, but he might not officially have reviewed it. So again, I might go forward thinking, oh yeah, I talked to Matt about it already, but the reality is he may not have looked at it through the lens of a reviewer. So what we're gonna do is put that standardized, and his commitment as a reviewer hat is gonna be different than it's Matt as my colleague who I might be working on a project. So that's just a cited example. So your contracts team is comprised of core, supplemental, procurement services members, and then there's going to be some additional roles in which we touch upon, authorized approvers, including those that are delegated, and then you're also going to have some super users, which we haven't talked too much about, but those will be determined as part of a pilot that's running simultaneous to us going live with these policies. So the university has acquired a contracts management system or software, and so what we're doing is running parallel to going live in a manual current state environment. We're also putting forth some pilots with selective units across the university to create these in an automated environment. And as you transition from current interim state to that new environment, it's going to be very similar experience so that, again, we're not creating two different processes for you to learn. Ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish is a one-stop shop. We want to give you resources. We want to make central point of entry easy for you, web or email. We're going to give you a team of people that are standardized. And at the inception of us going live, we're going to have an interim university contracts administrator that's going to help us in an interim capacity year one to get this software program up and running. So again, we're going to put information at your fingertips. We're going to put our resource team at your fingertips. But as mentioned, we're going to work with you to learn as we're going forward. We're not looking to go 2-1 live and pretend to know everything that you all do. We want to leverage your subject matter expertise and build upon this to a more optimal maturity state for contracts. So our end goal is automation. I think we can all agree that we can use some of that here at the university. So we're starting off small, central entry point. If you walked away with anything today, we would just ask for you to remember that with these policies going live, effective 2/1, you need to submit your contracts to the contracts email, or go to the website effective 2/1 and submit by that online submission form. So they both have the same requirements, they both have the same information that's requested. It's just a different option, one-stop shop. By doing so, we're going to ensure that the regulations and compliance are met, the document is appropriately assessed, created, reviewed, approved, and retained by the university. So what is the timeline for all of this happening? Some of you may have sat through some of the overview when we were going through policy creation. Next steps, we're going to transition to February. These policies are going to go live February 1. Submit contracts by email or website, as we've talked about. We're going to continue on our roadshow at all 3 campuses. So this open forum will be repeated Friday and into next week at the other campuses. And then the website will go live February 1. So we have the website out there right now. Admittedly, it's in a test instance, so there are some broken links. But there is some valuable information out there currently as of today. Just be mindful that it does not officially go live until 2/1. So just for those in this room, keep note of that. Phase 1 of transitioning into next steps is contracts consultation. That's our commitment to you. We want to learn everything we can about making these workflows the most effective to the university. So we're going to send out a determination form before we go live with these policies. And then we're going to schedule some time to do an actual assessment with you. Again, mostly for us to listen, but also to learn more about what you all are doing. And then from that, that's going to inform us simultaneously, as I mentioned, we're already moving forward implementing software. So part of that is going to figure out who are the appropriate groups for piloting, right? Part of pilot is to make sure we work out all the kinks, to figure out what we don't know. And so part of that, we're going to establish pilot groups that are going to help us to migrate from this current state environment, which is very manual, to an automated system in the one-stop shop environment, so that it'll be a little bit more self-service. Second part of this rollout, as we roll into February, is training is going to begin. We're going to have approver training, we're going to have super user training for those that are included in the pilot, and then we're going to have core and supplemental reviewer training. So Matt, who might be already familiar with reviewing contracts, we're just going to make sure that we're all on the same page going forwards and how we support you and what our baseline commitment is at inception of everything starting. And then that's when this pilot will commence. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. At the end of the day, really the biggest change for you all is the central point of entry. So if you walk out the door, that's the one thing we want you to remember, is that contracts have to be submitted. Now we're mindful that there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of details that go into what your contracts might be. But we don't want to seek perfection. Again, we want to be mindful and very deliberate about how we move forward. So if you have questions or concerns about when it should enter the system, just ask, or by default submit your contract, and then we will make sure that we respond within 1 to 2 days to say, oh, it looks like we're missing X, Y, and Z, or nope, we're good to go, and it'll enter into the process. Or if we still need to figure out what your department level review really means, just have that conversation with us, and we'll determine if it's better to have that in-depth conversation as part of our consultation, or if we need to figure out what the entry time is appropriately, currently effective 2/1. So end thing is central admission and communication. We want to help you to transition in the most effectively but yet transparent way we can to manage contracts more appropriately at the university, but also we want you to inform us as we move forward. So for additional information, I mentioned the website is live, but just be mindful that we're still working through some of the kinks and the go live. So just know that it is in a beta test state. And then if you need to submit feedback, we're very open to your feedback on what your thoughts are as we transition. Please don't hesitate to send to contracts@list.pacific.edu. We really appreciate you taking the time to attend today. Again, there's going to be more information to follow. But again, any concerns, questions, or feedback you have, good, bad, or otherwise, we're always open to the kind candor, as I put it, in terms of how we can support you differently as we move forward with such a big transition at the university. So thank you. Any questions? It's a very large audience here.
Do you see in the future that
You have to stop it.
or say that, but for
Oh, I didn't try.